Celaena lay on her cloak, trying to imagine that the sand was her down mattress in Rifthold, and that she wasn't completely exposed to the elements in the middle of the desert. Last thing she needed was to wake up with a scorpion in her hair, or worse. She flipped onto her side, cradling her head in the nook of her arm.
Can't sleep?
Ansel asked from a few feet away. Celaena tried not to growl. They'd spent the entire day trudging across the sand, stopping only at midday to sleep under their cloaks and avoid the mind-crisping glare of the sun. And a dinner of dates and bread hadn't been exactly filling, either. But Ansel had wanted to travel light, and said that they could pick up more food once they got to Zandria tomorrow afternoon. When Celaena complained about that, Ansel just told her she would be grateful it wasn't sandstorm season. "I've got sand in every crevice of my body," Celaena muttered, squirming as she felt the grains of sand against her skin. How in the hell had sand gotten inside her clothes? Her white tunic and trousers were layered enough that she couldn't even find her skin beneath it.
Are you sure you're Celaena Saradothin? Because I don't think she'd actually be this fussy. I bet she's used to roughing it.
"I'm plenty used to roughing it," Celaena said, her words sucked into the dunes rising around them. "That doesn't mean to say I have to enjoy it. I suppose that someone from the Western Wastes would find this luxurious." Ansel chuckled.
You have no idea.
Celaena quit her taunting as curiosity seized her. "Are your lands as cursed as they claim?"
Well, the Flatlands used to be part of the Witch Kingdom. And yet I suppose you could say they're somewhat cursed.
Ansel sighed loudly.
When the Crocan Queens ruled 500 years ago, it was very beautiful. At least the ruins all over the place seem like they would have been beautiful. But then the Iron Teeth clan destroyed it all when they overthrew the Crocan dynasty.
Iron Teeth? Ansel let out a low hiss.
Some witches, like the Crocans, were gifted with eternal beauty. But the Iron Teeth clans have iron teeth, sharp as a fish's. Actually, their iron fingernails are more dangerous. Those can gut you in one swipe.
A chill went down Celaena's spine.
But when the Iron Teeth clans destroyed the kingdom, they say the last Crocan queen cast a spell that turned the light against any that flew under the banners of the Iron Teeth, so that no crops would grow, the animals withered up and died, and the waters turned muddy. It's not like that now, though. The land has been fertile ever since the Iron Teeth clan journeyed east, towards your lands.
So have you ever seen one of these witches? Ansel went quiet for a moment before she said,
Yes.
Celaena turned towards her, propping her head on her hand. Ansel remained looking at the sky.
When I was 8, and my sister was 11, she, I, and Maddie, one of her friends, snuck out of Briarcliff Hall. A few miles away, there was a giant tower with a lone watchtower on top. The upper bits were all ruined because of the witch wars, but the rest of it was still intact. See, there was this archway that went through the bottom of the watchtower, so you could see through it to the other side of the hill. And one of the stable boys told my sister that if you looked through the archway on the night of the summer solstice, then you might see into another world.
The hair on Celaena's neck stood. So you went inside?
No.
Ansel said.
I got near the top of the tower and became so terrified that I wouldn't set foot on it. I hid behind a rock, and my sister and Maddie left me there while they went the rest of the way. I can't remember how long I waited. But then I heard screaming. My sister came running out. She just grabbed my arm and we ran. It didn't come out at first. But when we got to my father's hall, she told them what had happened. They had gone under the archway of the tower and seen an open door leading to the interior. But an old woman with metal teeth was standing in the shadows, and she grabbed Maddie and dragged her into the stairway.
Celaena choked on her breath.
Maddie began screaming and my sister ran. And when she told my father and his men, they raced for the door.
If you fall behind, you'll be left behind.
They arrived at dawn. But there was no trace of Maddie or the old woman.
Gone? Celaena whispered.
They found one thing.
Ansel said softly.
They climbed the tower, and on one of the landings they found the bones of a child. White as ivory and picked clean.
Gods above, Celaena said.
After that, my father walloped us within an inch of our lives, and we were on kitchen duty for 6 months. But we knew my sister's guilt would be punishment enough. She never really lost that haunted gleam in her eyes.
Celaena shuddered. Well, now I certainly won't be able to sleep tonight. Ansel laughed.
Don't worry,
she said, nestling down on her cloak.
I'll tell you a valuable secret. The only way to kill a witch is to cut off its head. Besides, I don't think an iron-teeth witch would stand much chance against us.
I hope you're right, Celaena muttered.
I am right,
Ansel said.
They might be vicious, but they're not invincible. And if I had an army of my own, if I had even 20 of the silent assassins at my command, I'd hunt down all the witches. They wouldn't stand a chance.
Her hand thumped against the sand. She must have struck the ground.
You know, these assassins have been here for ages. But what do? The Flatlands would prosper if they had an army of assassins to defend them. But no, they just sit in their oasis, silent and thoughtful, and whore themselves out to foreign courts. If I were the master, I'd use our numbers for greatness, for glory. We'd defend every unprotected realm out there.
Oh, so noble of you, Celaena said. Ansel of Briarcliff, defender of the realm. Ansel only laughed, and soon was asleep. Celaena, though, stayed awake for a while, unable to stop imagining what that witch had done when she dragged Maddie into the shadows of the tower. It was market day in Zandria, and though the city had long suffered from Ardlan's embargo, it still seemed that there were vendors from all the kingdoms on the continent and beyond. They were crammed into every possible space in the small, walled port city. All around Celaena were spices and jewels and clothes and food. Some sold right out of brightly painted wagons, others spread on blankets in shadowy alcoves. There was no sign that anyone knew anything about the ill-fated attack on the silent assassins the other night. She kept close to Ansel as they walked along, the red-haired girl weaving through the crowd with a kind of casual grace that Celaena, despite herself, envied. No matter how many people shoved into Ansel, or stepped in her path, or cursed her for stepping in theirs, she didn't falter, and her boyish grin only grew. Many people stopped to stare at her red hair and matching eyes, but Ansel took it in her stride. Even without her armor, she was stunning. Celaena tried not to think about how few people bothered to notice her. With the bodies and the heat, Celaena was oozing sweat by the time Ansel stopped near the edge of the souk.
I'm gonna be a couple of hours,
Ansel said, and waved a long, elegant hand to the sandstone palace hovering above the small city.
The old beasts like to talk and talk. Why don't you do some shopping?
Celaena straightened. I'm not going with you.
Into Beric's palace? Of course not. It's the master's business.
Celaena felt her nostrils flare. Ansel clapped her on the shoulder.
Believe me, you'd much rather spend a few hours in the souk than waiting in the stables with Beric's men leering at you. Unlike us.
Ansel flashed that grin.
They don't have access to baths whenever they please.
Ansel kept glancing at the palace, still a few blocks away. Nervous that she might be late? Or nervous that she was going to confront Beric on behalf of the master? Ansel brushed the remains of the red sand from the layers of her white clothes.
I'll meet you at the fountain at 3. Try not to get into too much trouble.
And with that, Ansel vanished into the press of bodies, her red hair gleaming like a hot brand. Celaena contemplated trailing her. Even if she was an outsider, why let her accompany Ansel on the journey if she was going to have to sit around? What could be so important and secret that Ansel wouldn't allow her to partake in the meeting? Celaena took a step towards the palace, but passing people jostled her about to and fro, and then a vendor began cooking something that smelled divine, and Celaena found herself following her nose instead. She spent the past 2 hours wandering from vendor to vendor. She cursed herself for not bringing more money with her. In Rifthold, she had a line of credit at all of her favourite stores, and never had to bother carrying money. Aside from small coppers and the occasional silver coin for tips and bribes. But here, well, the pouch of silver she'd brought felt rather light. The souk wound through every street, great and small, down narrow stairways and into half-buried alleys that had been there for thousands of years. Ancient doors opened onto courtyards, or 100 lanterns glittering like stars in the shadowy interior. For such a remote city, Zandria was teeming with life. She was standing under the stripped awning of a vendor from the southern continent, debating if she had enough to buy a pair of curled-toed shoes before her, and the lilac perfume she smelled at a wagon owned by white-haired maidens. The maidens claimed they were priestesses of Lani, the goddess of dreams, and perfumes apparently. Celaena ran her finger down the emerald silk threads embroidered on the delicate shoes, tracing the curve of the point as it swept upward and curled over the shoe itself. They'd certainly be eye-catching in Rifthold, and no one else in the capital would have them. Though, in the filthy city streets, these would easily get ruined. She reluctantly put the shoes down, and the vendor raised his brows. She shook her head, a rueful smile on her face. The man held up 7 fingers, 1 less than the original asking price, and she chewed on her lip, signing back. 6 coppers? The man spat on the ground. 7 coppers. 7 coppers was laughably cheap. She looked at the souk around her, and then back to the beautiful shoes. I'll come back later, she lied. And with one final, mournful glance, she continued along. The man began shouting after her in a language she'd never heard before, undoubtedly offering the shoes for 6 coppers, but she forced herself to keep walking. Besides, her pack was heavy enough. Lugging the shoes around would be an additional burden, even if they were lovely and different and not that heavy. And the thread detailing along the sides was as precise and as beautiful as calligraphy. And really, she could just wear them inside, so she was about to turn around and walk right back to the vendor when something glistening in the shadows beneath an archway between buildings caught her eye. There were a few hired guards standing around the covered wagon, and a tall, lean man stood behind the table displayed in front of it. But it wasn't the guards, or the man, or his wagon that had grabbed her attention. No, It was what was on his table that knocked the breath from her and made her curse her too light money purse. Spider's silk. There were legends about the horse-sized Stygian spiders that lurked in the woods of the Rune Mountains of the north, spinning their threads for hefty costs. Some said they offered it in exchange for human flesh. Others claimed the spiders dealt in years and dreams and could take either as payment. Regardless, it was as delicate as gossamer, lovelier than silk, and stronger than steel. And she'd never seen so much of it before. It was so rare that if you wanted it, odds were you'd have to go and get it for yourself. But here it was, yards of raw material waiting to be shaped. It was a king's ransom.
You know,
The merchant said in the common tongue, taking in Celaena's wide-eyed stare.
You're the first person today to recognize it for what it is.
I'd know what that is even if I were blind. She approached the table, but didn't dare to touch the sheets of iridescent fabric. But what are you doing here? Surely you can't get much business in Zandria. The man chuckled. He was middle-aged, with close-cropped brown hair and midnight blue eyes that seemed haunted, though they now sparkled with amusement.
I might also ask what a girl from the north is doing in Zandria.
His gaze flicked to the daggers tucked into the brown belt slung across her white clothes.
And with such beautiful weapons.
She gave him a half smile. At least your eye is worthy of your wares.
I try.
He stretched a bow, then beckoned her closer.
So tell me, girl from the north, when have you seen spider silk?
She clenched her fingers into fists to keep her from touching the priceless material. I know a courtesan in Rifthold whose madam had a handkerchief made from it, given to her by an extraordinarily wealthy client. And that handkerchief had probably cost more than most peasants made in a lifetime.
That was a kingly gift. She must have been skilled.
She didn't become madam of the finest courtesans in Rifthold for nothing. The merchant let out a low laugh.
So if you associate with the finest courtesans in Rifthold, then what brings you to this bit of desert scrub?
She shrugged. This and that. In the dim light beneath the canopy, the spider silk still glittered like the surface of the sea. But I'd like to know how you came across so much of this. Did you buy it? Or find the Stygian spiders on your own? He traced a finger down the planes of fabric.
I went there myself. What else is there to know?
His midnight eyes darkened.
In the depths of the Rune Mountains, everything is a labyrinth of mist and trees and shadow. So you don't find the Stygian spiders. They find you.
Celaena stuffed her hands into her pockets to keep her from touching the spider silk. Though her fingers were clean, there were still grains of red sand under her nails. So, why are you here then?
My ship to the southern continent doesn't leave for 2 days. Why not set up shop? Zandria might not be Rifthold, but you never know who might approach your stall.
He winked at her.
How old are you anyway?
She raised her chin. I turned 17 2 weeks ago. And what a miserable birthday that had been. Trudging across the desert with no one to celebrate with except her recalcitrant guide, who just patted her on the shoulder when she announced it was her birthday. Horrible.
Not much younger than me.
He said. She chuckled, but paused when she didn't find him smiling. And how old are you? She asked. There was no mistaking it. He had to be at least 40. Even if his hair wasn't sprinkled with silver, his skin was weathered.
25.
He said. She gave a start.
I know. Shocking.
The yards of spider silk lifted in the breeze from the nearby sea.
Everything has a price.
He said.
25 years for 100 yards of spider silk. I thought they meant to take them off the end of my life. But even if they'd warned me, I would have said yes.
She eyed the caravan behind him. This much spider silk was enough to enable him to live what years he had left as a very, very wealthy man. Why not take it to Rifthold?
Because I've seen Rifthold, and Orinth, and Banjali. I'd like to see what 100 yards of spider silk might fetch me outside of Odolin's empire.
Is there anything to be done about the years you lost? He waved a hand.
I followed the western side of the mountains on my way here, and met an old witch along the way. I asked if she could fix me, but she said what was taken, and only the death of the spider who consumed my 20 years could return them to me.
He examined his hands, already lined with age.
For a copper more, she told me that only a great warrior could slay a Stygian spider, the greatest warrior in the land. Though perhaps an assassin from the north might do.
How did you...
You can't honestly think no one knows about the Sassi Sukast. Why else would a 17-year-old girl bearing exquisite daggers be here unescorted? And one who holds such fine company in Rifthold, no less. Are you here to spy for Lord Beric?
Celaena did her best to quell her surprise. Pardon me? The merchant shrugged, glancing towards the towering palace.
I heard from a city guard that strange dealings go on between Beric and some of these silent assassins.
Perhaps, was all Celaena said. The merchant nodded, not all that interested in it anymore. But Celaena tucked the information away for later. Were some of the silent assassins actually working for Beric? Perhaps that's why Ansel had insisted on keeping the meeting so secret. Maybe the master didn't want the names of the suspected traitors getting out.
So,
The merchant asked.
will you retrieve my lost years for me?
She bit her lip, thoughts of spies instantly fading away. To journey into the depths of the Rune Mountains, to slay a Stygian spider. She could certainly see herself battling the 8-legged monstrosities, and witches. Though, after Ansel's story, meeting a witch, especially one belonging to the Iron Teeth clans, was the last thing she'd ever want to do. For a heartbeat, she wished Sam were here with her. Even if she told him about this encounter, he'd never believe her. But would anyone ever believe her? As if he could read her daydreams, he said,
I could make you rich beyond your wildest dreams.
I'm already rich, and I'm unavailable till the end of the summer,
I won't be back from the southern continent for at least a year anyway.
he countered. She examined his face, the gleam in his eyes. Adventure and glory aside, anyone who'd sell 20 years of their life for a fortune couldn't be trusted. But the next time you're in Rifthold, she said slowly, seek out a robe in Hamel. The man's eyes widened. She wondered how he'd react if he knew who she was. He'll know where to find me. She turned from the table.
But what's your name?
She looked over her shoulder. He'll know where to find me, she repeated, and began walking back to the stall with the pointed shoes.
Wait!
She paused in time to see him fumbling with the folds of his tunic.
Here,
He set down a plain wooden box on the table.
a reminder.
Celaena flipped open the lid and her breath caught. A folded bit of woven spider silk lay inside, no bigger than 6 square inches. She could buy 10 horses with it. Not that she'd ever sell it. No, this was an heirloom to be passed down from generation to generation. If she ever had children, which seemed highly unlikely. A reminder of what? She shut the lid and tucked the small box into the inner pocket of her white tunic. The merchant smiled sadly.
That everything has a price.
The phantom pain flashed through her face. I know, she said, and left. She wound up buying the shoes, even if it was nearly impossible to pass over the lilac perfume, which smelled even more lovely the second time she approached the priestess's stall. When the city bells pealed 3 o'clock, she was sitting on the lip of the fountain, munching on what she hoped was mashed beans inside a warm bread pocket. Ansel was 15 minutes late and didn't apologize. She merely grabbed Celaena by the arm and began leading her through the still-packed streets, her freckled face gleaming with sweat.
What is it?
Celaena asked.
What happened in your meeting?
That's none of your business.
Ansel said a bit sharply. Then she added,
Just follow me.
They wound up sneaking inside the Lord of Zandria's palace walls, and Celaena knew better than to ask questions as they crept across the grounds. But they didn't head into the towering central building. No, they approached the stables, where they slipped around the guards and entered the pungent shadows within.
There had better be a good reason for this,
Celaena warned, as Ansel crept towards a pen.
Oh, there is.
She hissed back and stopped at a gate, waving Celaena forward. Celaena frowned. It's a horse. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew it wasn't just any horse.
It's an Asterian horse.
Ansel breathed, her red-brown eyes growing huge. The horse was as black as pitch, with dark eyes that bored into Celaena's own. She'd heard of Asterian horses, of course, the most ancient breed of horse in Aurelia. Legend claimed that the Fae had made them from the 4 winds. Spirit from the north, strength from the south, speed from the east, and wisdom from the west. All rolled into a slender-snouted, high-tailed, lovely creature that stood before her.
Have you ever seen something so beautiful?
Ansel whispered.
Her name is Hisley.
Mares, Celaena remembered, were more prized, as Asturian pedigree were traced through the female line.
And that one
Ansel said, pointing to the other stall.
is named Cassida. It means drinker of the wind in the desert dialect.
Cassida's name was fitting. The slender mare was a dappled grey, with a sea-foam white mane and thundercloud coat. She huffed and stomped her forelegs, staring at Celaena with eyes that seemed older than the earth itself. Celaena suddenly understood why the Asturian horses were worth their weight in gold.
Lord Beric got them today. Bought them from a merchant on his way to Punjali.
Ansel slipped into Hisley's pen. She cooed and murmured, stroking the muzzle of the horse.
He's planning on testing them out in half an hour.
That explained why they were already saddled.
And?
Celaena whispered, holding out a hand for Cassida to smell. The mare's nostrils flared, her velvety nose tickling Celaena's fingertips.
And then he's either going to give them away as a bribe, or lose interest in them, and let them languish here for the rest of their lives. Lord Beric tends to tire of his playthings rather quickly.
What a waste.
Indeed it is.
Ansel muttered from inside the stall. Celaena lowered her fingers from Cassida's muzzle and peered into Hisley's pen. Ansel was running a hand down Hisley's black flank, her face still full of wonder. Then she turned.
Are you a strong rider?
Of course, Celaena said slowly.
Good.
Celaena bit down her cry of alarm as Ansel unlocked the stall door and guided Hisley out of her pen. In a smooth, quick motion, the girl was atop the horse, clutching the reins in one hand.
Because you're gonna have to ride like hell.
With that, Ansel sent Hisley into a gallop, heading straight for the stable doors. Celaena didn't have time to gape or really even process what she was about to do as she unlocked Cassida's pen, yanked her out, and heaved herself into the saddle. With a muffled curse, she dug her heels into the mare's side and took off.